have fun. Like, I had so much fun meeting my neighbors and spending time with them and doing crazy things and eating good food. Like, it actually is fun. It doesn't have to be this weighty burden that we're bearing. In fact, if it is that, maybe there's something wrong with how we're going about it. We could think about it differently. But people are really lovely and they do bear the image of God, and they can be really challenging. But my neighbors brought an incredible amount of joy into my life. Look for fun and be curious.
Hey guys, it's Melissa Moore. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of Faith, Hope, Love, where we grow together in our faith, increase in hope, and learn how to better love God and love other people. On today's episode, we are in our Momentum series, which is based off of Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 3, and we're in our Moving Others portion, which is based off of 1 Corinthians 12 and 13. And that is talking about the spiritual gifts, which, from my understanding reading that passage, love is the most excellent of the greatest spiritual gifts. And so I'm really excited to jump into today's episode. We are joined by Lynda MacGibbon, and she is the author of My Vertical Community. And in her book, it's a beautiful storytelling perspective of how to love our neighbors well. Not just random people, but those that are literally our neighbors. And so I'm really excited to have her on the show just to explain some of her experience and to tell us what it looks like just to love people in practical ways. Lynda, thanks for joining me on the show today. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really fun. To follow this book around, which is what I feel like I've been doing since it appeared in the world in March. I've just kind of been following it wherever it lands and having conversations about it. I am in Toronto, and that's home for me, and that's where my work is with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I just was traveling to the West Coast, as I was just telling you earlier. So I've been on planes for the first time in 2 years, which is unusual, and just got back to my condo last night. So really, really delighted to be here.
I love it, and I just really loved your book. It really just came alive to me. I feel like it's hard to find books that are nonfiction, but also are just written in a beautifully artistic way. I just felt drawn into the story, and I felt like I was just getting to know your neighbors as if I was sitting across from sitting across from them at the dinner table. So I loved your book. I want to kind of dive in the very beginning of the book. You kind of talk about being new to Toronto, and I wanted to see, what was your experience being in a new city with a new job, not really having a community? How was that for you?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and I feel like I just had a conversation with a young adult about this very topic as they sort of move into a new place. I've moved around in my career. At the early stage of my career, I moved around every 3 to 5 years until I finally landed the job that I had in the place I moved from in New Brunswick, Canada, where I stayed for 22 years. But prior to that, I moved around every 3 to 5 years. And by I think the second or third move, I kind of began to learn that it often takes about 9 months to establish some friendships, feel like you're at home in a new place, um, become familiar with the place, and feel like there are some people in your life that you have things to do with. And so even when I moved to Toronto, which was a huge move for me because it was so much a bigger city, so much more complex than the place I had been living, I knew it would take some time, but as I talk about in the book, I'd also made this decision that I was going to try to make my neighborhood my connecting point. Previously, in every move, I had started with church. And I had always started that, I'm going to find a church. That's going to be my first thing to do. And I'm going to settle in there. But I made some different decisions. I did find a church, but it wasn't my first priority. My first priority for this move was my neighborhood. And as I share in the book, it was pretty lonely at the beginning. It was slow going, and it was helpful. I had a brother in the city, and I had a couple of young adult nieces in the city. Obviously, I had work and colleagues already established with my work because it was a transfer. So I had good friends, but I also had set up for myself this decision that I was going to try to meet people in my neighborhood, which put a bit of a barrier, a self-made barrier to how easily my life would unfold. But loneliness, unsettledness, those are all part of moving to a new place.
I know for myself, my husband and I have been married for 10 years now, but we've lived in 4 different cities. And so for me, I've kind of almost gotten used to this just move kind of lifestyle. And it's challenging to build those intentional relationships because there's almost this feeling of, man, maybe we'll just pick up and move again. And it's just easier to not do that. And I know my personal experiences, it's very easy to just want to go to a church, find a community there, and just find people like myself to connect with, that it's easy and encouraging, and there's no I mean, not saying that it's, it's easy to be in relationships like that, but there was less challenge. And so I loved reading your book. It kind of called me out. And I have some relationships with some of my neighbors, but nothing like what you present in the book. And so I loved the fact that your friend group that you have in the book, I want to make sure I get the names right, with Rachel, Brian, Yolanda, Anna, just as a couple of those, but how each person is so distinctly different from the next, and it's very intentional in the way that you created this community. So I would kind of love to hear, how did you want to start this community? And with Faith, how did you bring up God in conversation? Was it easy? Was it difficult? How did you do that intentionally?
Hmm. I'll start with the first question, how we started, because when I first moved into the building, my friend Rachel did not live in the building, and Rachel moved in just about a year after I did, with the very same values that I had for meeting people, connecting, being hospitable, um, kind of. While I came into this building and into this move to Toronto with this desire to understand what God meant by love your neighbor, and really trying this kind of theological sociological experiment, what would happen if I did? Rachel moved into the building just as somebody who meets people wherever she is. So if she's on the bus, she talks to the person on the bus. If she's, in a coffee shop, she talks to the person in the coffee shop. And she's got a capacity to kind of be fully present to people for a moment. And I learned that from her. So it was very helpful for me when Rachel moved into the building, because now we were two. And again, I say this in the book, I think it's a lot less weird for people in a neighborhood to be invited into somebody's home if there are two people already doing that. So I think families might have a little easier, married couples, but for singles, it can be difficult. So having a friend made a huge difference, and a friend who had the same values. And from the very beginning, our value was just like, whoever God brings across our path, we will welcome them. And it wasn't necessarily that we were going to seek to become really good friends with them all, but just that let's just welcome them. So I think that was part of the why things unfolded as they did, because it was really just well, let's just see who God brings, and let's be open and welcoming to whoever God brings into our lives, and take the next step after that. The It doesn't take long for faith to come up in conversations if people ask you anything about, well, why do you invite people into your home? We hosted these Monday night dinners that were open doors. Why would you do that? Why would you have just an open door dinner? So it's very easy to say, well, I'm a practicing Christian. I actually believe in hospitality, and I think I believe in trying to meet my neighbors. And so this is, and you know what? People need a place to eat on Monday nights because it's kind of a down day of the week. So there's all kinds of ways to bring faith up in just a natural. I'm doing this because I'm motivated by this. I'm motivated by my faith. My faith gives me certain values. And for some people, the conversation stopped right then and there, and we never talked about faith much at all anymore. But for other people, they were curious and they wanted to talk about faith. So then the conversations just went deeper and deeper. Um, so that's a couple of ways. There were a few more risky things I did, like starting the Bible study. But I think just having an ear to listen. Can I answer this question out of my faith that this person is asking me? Much easier, I think, to answer a question than to state, hey, I'm inviting you to my house for dinner because I'm a Christian. That's a bit weird. But responding to questions authentically out of the place of faith leads to more conversation.
I love that. And I think it takes the pressure off. I think just being able to show up as whole people, that faith is a part of who we are, but it not being this thing where this every single interaction has to include the name of Jesus. And I think I see that happening so beautifully in your book, that it was just like you were consistently present for years, that it wasn't just a one-off conversation. And I think it's easy. I'm kind of similar to Rachel. I love to just talk to random people about my day. My husband thinks it's crazy, but I just love to get to know people. But I think there's a difference between just meeting someone and inviting them into your home, inviting them into your life, and having this consistent relationship. That's a whole nother level.
Yes, and I really learned, both in the process of meeting my neighbors and spending time with them, but also as I wrote the book and pondered the question about why love your neighbor, that, I believe that the commandment to love your neighbor and the Great Commission to go and make disciples they're both commands that Jesus very clearly gives us. And they're linked, but they're also separate tracks. And so we love our neighbors because they are our neighbors, and that is a good thing to do, for so many reasons, whether they ever become Christians or not. And where we have the opportunity to share our faith with them, we invite them to think about Jesus themselves. But it's not, for me now, it's a very separate question of intent of why I'm doing this. And I think that's something that I learned to work through this whole process over the 7 years or so of the book tells the story.
Yeah. And are you still living in the same neighborhood?
I'm still living in the same neighborhood. The interesting thing that has happened through the number of years in COVID and just the transience of a city is everybody has moved out except for one of my neighbors. So Elizabeth is still in the building, and she lives 2 doors away from me. My For the last 2 years, Rachel was actually living in my apartment. Her apartment sold, so we wanted to stay in the building. So she moved in with me. But we've just come to a decision, and she's just moved out. She's not far in the neighborhood, but we're not in the building anymore. And one by one, all of my neighbors have moved away. Some of them to a nearby building, but most of them actually out of the city. And so that's been another interesting place for me to ponder, as even as the book came out, and lots of people have asked me, well, are you still having your dinners? Are you still doing all of these things? And no, things come to an end. I'm still in touch with the majority of my neighbors, although there have been big gaps in that. Again, we live in a very transient society, and people move on, and they disconnect. And so it's been very interesting to process and pray over. That was a phenomenal experience of getting to know people. It's opened me up to continue to get to know people. But I think some people won't get to know people. It's what you said earlier. Well, I might only be here for 2 years. I might not. Should I really make the investment? Is it really worth it? And I would say it's absolutely worth it, but it doesn't have to be forever. And there's a freedom in that. Just be present to people while you're with them in the moment. And maybe it'll be a lifetime friendship, but probably 80% of the time it won't be.
I feel like that's something that's so good about it too, is it somewhat takes the pressure off of not knowing, is this going to be lifelong? Is it going to be short term? And it's, if we can just love the people in front of us, it doesn't matter if it's forever or just for this short season. And I just, again, your book is so beautiful, and that it's being able to see people as they are, and welcoming everyone. And it was very, kind of progressive, seeing the dinners, and then going into a writer's group, which seems unconventional, and then going into a Bible study. That to me sounds terrifying, but I feel like that's something that it flowed very naturally, as a kind of a progression. What has your experience been with this? Like, is this something that you would do again? How has this impacted yourself personally, as well as those that have been in your groups?
Yeah, I think it's impacted me really significantly personally. I mean, I think I learned the lesson. Oh, don't be afraid to make friends with new people, because it doesn't have to be forever. You don't have to craft it so that it's going to be forever. Just show up and be with people and learn about them and enjoy them while they're in your life, and be real and authentic. Um, a young friend of mine, she's in her 30s, a young woman I know, read the book this summer, and she was telling me, by the end of the book, it felt like you had discovered more about self love for yourself. And I hadn't really put it into that term before. So I was very grateful for her observation because it made me think again about the why God would say, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love God and your neighbor as you love yourself. I wondered then, I wonder if loving your neighbor helps you love yourself. If that's part of the gift of the command, as you love your neighbor, you will learn to love yourself. As your neighbor responds to you in love, you will learn you can be loved yourself. So I think that was a really important lesson for me. Neighbors have something to teach us about our own value and worth, even as we're trying to reach out and say, I think you're worthwhile. So, so very much a learning that to continue to be present to neighbors, to the people in front of me, um, whoever that is in the moment, has something, a gift for me in it. None of the things we were doing in the book are happening anymore. You know, the Monday night dinners had kind of run their course over about 5 years. Life shifted for both Rachel and I, and we knew we only could do it together. It was too hard to do it alone. The writers group really, we tried to hang on to that until even into the pandemic. We were meeting outside in a park, and then eventually, winter came, and it just became too hard. And then some of the key players, Brian was one. He moved out of the city, so that, and we'd been feeling for about a year. This feels like it's done and we need to let go of it. And the Bible study it went for about 2.5 years because we finished the Gospel of John in that time. So now I'm in a stage of asking God, well, what do you want me to do with my time? Who do you want me to meet? And I was swimming the other day in our pool in the condo, and there was a woman there swimming, and we got to chatting because it's a small pool, and she had just moved into the building 6 months before. So I have her apartment unit. I've told her, hey, let's get together for coffee. I'd be happy to get to know you a bit. She was very outgoing. So I'll do that in the next little while, and connect with her. It's just being present. Like, who's God bringing across my path? My neighbor Elizabeth and I we really became really good friends. And so we often have coffee, on Saturday morning. She picked me up at the airport last night. We'll do things together as friends do. But I think an important lesson is we're so easily programmed, and we start something and then we think we have to do it forever because we know how to do it now, and it's just natural and we do it. But things need to come to an end, and we need to let them go and ask God, what's next? What do you want me to do? But always with the same intention of, am I available to the person in front of me? Am I present? Am I curious? So um, I doubt that I'll do another, the if I was to write a sequel, it wouldn't look like the first book. I don't know what it would look like.
I think that's a really good point, that it doesn't always have to look like this. So if someone picks up this book and reads it, it's not going to look like this. Because, for myself, I live in just a community with a bunch of houses. I don't live in an apartment where there's people next door, next door, next door. It's very different even in my own community. So the way that I do this would look different than your situation. And if you were to move, it would look different if you were to do this again.
Right? And it's your personality, and it's the people in your life that could help you connect and reach out to others. So it looks different for everybody. Yeah.
I love what you kind of said earlier, that I think this is an important thing if Christians are watching this to hear this, that I feel like there's this natural tendency, unfortunately, for Christians to kind of say, I have all the answers. Let me teach you and show you what you should do. And I think that really puts a huge wall up for people. And I feel like, and even for ourselves, right, that we kind of want to come off as this perfect facade of, I have all the answers. Let me help you live your life the right way. And I think what you've done in the book that's so beautiful is that it's, what do I have to learn from my neighbors? That it's not that we have all the answers, but they are human, created in the image of God also. And what do we have to learn from them? And I just think the way that you've interacted, you show lots of very raw moments, going into situations that are not like going into a club. That, like, the last chapter was just so encouraging to me, that just loving people doesn't have to happen just in your own home or just in a church or just in like a church event. It just happens in real life, and it's not always comfortable. And man, it's really called me out a lot reading your book. I would want to kind of ask as well if there's someone that's watching this that maybe is wanting to create intentional community with people that don't look and act and live like them. What are some things that you'd recommend? I mean, in the book, you kind of talk about dinners and writing groups. What are some ways that you would suggest people kind of start this process?
Yeah, so I think food is absolutely essential. And, the book, a few people have said to me, food's kind of a character in your book. And that's absolutely true.
I was so hungry when I was reading your book. I literally, it made me want to go out and buy all this amazing food because I can't make all of it. I
Right?
loved
Yeah.
that about your book.
At least olives and maybe some French bread. um, so I think food is absolutely critical, and hospitality and intentionality around it. So Rachel brought this value even more than I did. She always wanted there to be an abundance, like more than enough. And she also wanted to think about what will make people comfortable. So in our space, we were comfortable if people brought a bottle of wine with them, if that's what they wanted to have. We always had Perrier and other things there as well. But because we wanted people just to feel like this is a space you can come into and be comfortable. So we just didn't have any rules about that kind of stuff. Um, but having food together and having it be abundant and lovely and thought about, it doesn't have to be excessively expensive. It doesn't have to be, you don't even have to make it yourself. Just having it there makes a difference for people. I just was really blessed by being at a friend's house out in British Columbia that I haven't seen for 2 years. And um, my friend is a Jewish Christian, and so they always celebrate Shabbat on Friday night, and they always invite friends in to celebrate with them, and they always ask the question around the table, what are you most grateful to have experienced in the past week? And so I got to sit around a table with my friends, but also two of their neighbors who I did not know, and answer that question. And we all answered it. So we all then knew something about each other. So I think food is one really critical thing, but I think intentionality and thoughtfulness is another one. So when Rachel and I would host these dinners, we kind of had these subconscious, but maybe conscious because we did talk about it, roles for ourselves. So the role was to be host, the role was to be hospitable. And so I would be thinking about the people in the circle in the living room and how am I caring for them? Is everybody included? Is anybody left out? And she would be in the kitchen cooking and talking to one person and giving all that attention to that one person who wanted that. And I don't think it was inauthentic for us to go into that dinner party knowing, well, I'm going to feel responsible for creating a place of hospitality, or she's going to create a space where one person or two could feel welcome and comfortable. I think that we need to be more intentional. So, two things: good food and a bit of intentionality about how do I want to help people feel welcome in this space. Um, and then I think it's up to personally, my friend Rachel loved to cook and host. I love getting people into Bible studies. So we both liked the writing group ideas. We just kind of came up with things that felt natural to us. So people, it might be that you love to go running. And so inviting a neighbor to go running with you or joining running, or you just like to go for walks. Again, it's sort of thinking about, well, what do I like to do? And could I invite somebody to do it with me? And then as they get to know you, they're going to invite you to do the things they like to do. And that's a whole nother challenge because that takes time and willingness to say yes.
One thing I really appreciate too is, you don't just do this full time. You have a job, you have other things that you're involved in. It's not just you have like 24 hours a day to give. And I think the beautiful thing is that you were intentional about just doing things with people. Like I remember you shared it with, I want to say it was with Brian, that you went grocery shopping together, and he just went with you for the whole day and just did stuff with you. And maybe that's not something people would feel comfortable with, but I think being able to invite people into the normalcy of life, like I know I have a neighbor that runs. I used to like to run, but I don't enjoy working out right now. But maybe that's something that I can do with my friend, and being able to be open to trying new things, but it's just inviting people into our everyday, the things we enjoy. And just the intentionality, I think, is beautiful.
Yes, and I also want to say, like, it's good for us to stretch ourselves outside of our comfort zones, but it's also good for us to be kind to ourselves and recognize when we need to put boundaries in, or say no. And so, while the story I tell in the book of spending that whole day with Brian, because it just unfolded that way, and I had no good excuse in my head as to why to say no. So, but other times he might invite me to do something, or somebody else would invite me to do something, and I would say no because I honestly didn't have the energy or I didn't have the time. So I think we want to be careful that we're not putting guilt trips on ourselves and saying, well, this is just, I just have to be a martyr, I have to sacrifice. On the other hand, we can be pretty comfortable and self indulgent in our lives as well. And so a little bit of stretch is a good thing for us to think about as well.
For sure. I know for myself, like I come at this as a wife and mom. And so for me, like I have certain hours of my day that my family is all home, and it would be hard for me just to have those intentional conversations. But I also do have space in my life. And I think the thing is we choose how we use our time. And it's easy to scroll on Facebook or watch, 5 episodes on Netflix, and we have to be, again, loving of ourselves, taking care of ourselves, but also knowing that there's an entire world of people that just need love. And it's not hard, it's free to give away.
Right. And often it's just in our natural places. So where you go with your children, there will be people and who have children. And so there would be natural connections to make. In my building, it was natural to meet people in the elevator or in the hot tub or in the pool. And it's just the natural places you go, being attentive to who's there and then being curious about them. Um, and always praying, like asking God, is this a person you want me to lean into, or you know or I'm really not feeling the time right now, is that okay? And then listening to the spirit, I think, and not again putting this oppressive guilt on ourselves that we have to perform, but instead a more peaceful, oh, I sense a nudge here to to connect with this person, or I sense a freedom to go and do what I need to do and rescue my kid who's just fallen off the the seesaw or something.
And I think that's what's so cool is like in the book, you really invite God into that. And you may not tell the other person that you have. And I think there's a lot of instances where you tell the other person, I'm praying for you, and you actually go and do it. Or you send them a message, hey, I'm going to pray for you right now. If you want to stop, you can stop it, but I'm going to pray for you right now. And I thought that was so powerful because that's such an easy thing for us to do. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's something that we all are capable of doing. And I think it's when we include God in that process that it isn't force, it isn't like a shame-filled guilt trip when we're not doing it at 100% all the time. But it's, I guess I would just encourage people that haven't read it just to pick up a copy, and really just to pray over God. How could you use this in my life? What could you do through me in my community? So before we go, do you have any like last tips or things you'd want to share?
And just touching on the praying for people, I think in the instances in the book where I prayed for people with people, there was already trust established between us. Every now and then, there might have been a situation where I asked somebody if I could pray for them, and they would say no. But mostly, I offered it when I felt like there was some trust established. In the 2 years that we did the Bible study, we never prayed in that Bible study because the people that were coming were mostly seekers and interested in it for a variety of reasons. They weren't there because they were necessarily um, Christians. So we just approached the study that way and had lots of good food, but we didn't pray. And then there are neighbors and good friends that I've never prayed with. I pray for, and they know it. But every now and then they'll say, "Hey, you could pray about that for me." But so I think trust is really significant, and being aware. How is this? What's happening in this relationship? I guess the only other thing I would just say is have fun. Like, I had so much fun meeting my neighbors and spending time with them and doing crazy things and, and eating good food. Like, it actually is fun. It doesn't have to be this weighty burden that we're bearing. In fact, if it is that, maybe there's something wrong with how we're going about it. We could think about it differently. But people are really lovely and they do bear the image of God, and they can be really challenging, but my neighbors brought an incredible amount of joy into my life.
And lots of good food, it sounds like, too. Like reading the book that every person came with their own dish, and whatever they offered to bring.
Yeah, I guess that's the final thing I would say is make sure that you're open to letting people serve you as somebody, not just a, it's where we started off. Aren't the ones that have everything to offer. People have something to offer us as well, and it's just learning to be in a posture of receiving is important.
That's beautiful. Well, again, thank you so much, Lynda, for just taking the time to chat with me. I know it's really encouraged me and called me out on some of the things that, like, I know God has been asking me to do, but I've been almost like afraid or unsure how to go about it. So I just appreciate your time. How can we continue following you, like maybe website and social media, and how can we purchase your book?
Yeah, so the book is available online anywhere. If you have an independent bookstore that you like, you can order it directly from IVP. So I always like supporting independent bookstores, so I encourage people to do that. They can order it. It's available on Audible as well as in a paper copy. It's short; you can read it in a very short amount of time. And I blog not regularly, but I blog somewhat irregularly right now on lindamcgibbon.com. So it's easy for people to find me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Lynda. And for those that are watching this, I hope that this was an encouragement to you and maybe gave you some ideas of how to connect and love your neighbors well. So I will see you back here next week.